Today I visited the Panopticon. It's actually the National Museum of Colombia, but the building is an old prison from the 19th century, and it's called the Panopticon because essentially it was a panopticon. So if you don't know what a panopticon is, essentially it's a philosophical concept of a prison. I don't actually know if there was ever an ideal panopticon built or used, but there were many designed based on the concept apparently during the 19th century or the 1800s, and this is one of them. Now, unfortunately, there's really not much left of the prison itself on the inside. It's really nothing. I was hoping to see some cells and kind of get an actual good idea of what the prison would have been like. Unfortunately, though, there's only a small exhibit about it, which to me was disappointing. I think it would have been infinitely more fascinating if the museum was more centered around the concept of the Panopticon. But instead, it's more just what it exactly is. It's the National Museum of Colombia, so it's mostly about the history of Colombia and pre-colonization and I guess all the way up to modern times. As for the museum itself, it's a really nice place, with pretty well organized exhibits, but I would kind of describe it as moderately pretentious and slightly woke. So basically, like most modern museums. So for the entry fee, though, and the time spent there, it's worth it. I would say, yeah, it's worth checking out. But, like I said, it was disappointing to me that it was actually not more about the Panopticon itself, because that, to me, is actually the interesting subject, the Panopticon. So, as I was saying, the Panopticon, the concept of it is basically that it's a prison where there's many prisoners, and it allows for only a few guards, and the goal is that the guards can see into all of the prisoners' cells, but the prisoners can't see the guards, so they don't know when they're being watched. So it allows for a few guards to potentially watch many prisoners, but the point is that they don't know when they're being watched. They can't see when the guard is actually looking into their cell. So the point is, it's a psychological manipulation. Essentially, what they're trying to do is have it so that the prisoners regulate their own behavior, because it feels like you could be watched at any time, and in theory you are being watched at all times, and it would be you don't know when you're being watched, and you don't want to do anything wrong because you do something wrong, and that's the time where they're watching you, and then they come into your cell and beat you or whatever it is, punish you. So that was the concept, is by doing this, they are essentially regulating all the prisoners' behavior with very little resources, with few guards, which in turn is the psychological manipulation for the end goal that the prisoners regulate themselves, which ties into kind of a twisted sense of reformation, where the prisoners, out of fear, are regulating themselves so that they can, in theory, go back and integrate into society with that self-regulation. It's kind of almost like a Clockwork Orange type of thing, where they're like twisting their minds and using fear, manipulation, coercion, so that they become civilized, or that they can act in the society, which makes you question, like, what is our society actually producing as a person? And this idea of a panopticon has always been so interesting to me, because in a more subtle way, it's like our modern society is a panopticon. And that's kind of how it all ties together, right? We live our lives most of the time regulating our own behavior out of like fear of social ostracization, or essentially on a further level, punishment by law or by your peers or by your community, whether it's religious or just even a social community. And sometimes, even when no one's around, right, we regulate our own behavior because we're scared or something like this of not fitting in, of not being a part of it. So it really makes me question that, because how much do we regulate our own lives just based out of fear and out of the feeling that somebody's watching? And depending where you go, I mean, like for example, in London, apparently it's one of the most surveilled cities in all of the world. And I've never been to China, but China too, for example, they have apparently face recognition cameras and highly surveilled, and you can be caught doing things wrong and be punished. So in some cases you are actually being watched, but it's kind of like you don't really know when you're being watched. Like for example, in England there's a ton of traffic cameras, and I mean they have these in lots of countries now, and they just put a sign up that says traffic camera coming up, or traffic, this highway is air patrolled for speed, right? And then some people, I guess, I've talked to, they're like, oh, I know where the cameras are, so I speed anyway, which is quite funny, because that's exactly what they're trying to create, is this panopticon effect, where everybody is just following the speed limit because they don't know where the cameras are, and they're scared of getting busted. And in doing that, they're manipulating the people to manipulate themselves. So it's just interesting, because this concept of a panopticon, the prison itself, is quite an old philosophical idea, and the whole way that these prisons operated, or the use of these prisons, died out like sometime during the 1900s apparently. But I would say that this philosophical concept has found its way into our society, and so much in a way that a good example is the traffic camera thing, but in a way that people often regulate themselves even when nobody's around. So it makes me question, like, how free are we actually, and how much of it is actually an illusion, and how much of what you perceive is your choice and your freedom is actually being regulated by basically the master's voice, the the powers that be, even if they don't have any direct control over you, even if the police aren't going to bust into your house, how often are you regulating yourself and changing your behavior out of fear and out of obedience?